What's up, everybody? Welcome back into another episode of The Lawyer You Know, and we are jumping into a brand new case, first-time video as the trial begins for ASAP Rocky. I didn't know anything about this case coming to the trial, and day one started with fireworks, as the defense is saying. The state disclosed expert testimony and evidence late. They cannot respond to it. We have to continue the trial. Judge says no. We're starting today. We'll talk about that and specifically focus on opening statements so we can get a lay of the land of what's going on in this case. What are the allegations? What are the defense? And will the state be able to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt? Let's get to it. So if you're new to this case or don't know anything about it, you'd be in the same boat as me. I know who ASAP Rocky is, but more at the forefront of my mind, I know who Rihanna is, who is ASAP Rocky's significant other. I didn't know anything about this case. You guys asked me about it. Seemed interesting enough, especially now that I know what the defense is. So we're going to get into who all the players are, what happened, what this is all about. It's on video footage. They have security camera footage that's played extensively throughout the opening statement. We're going to listen to big chunks of the state's opening statement and the defense's opening statement so we can get a fair and balanced overview of what the lawyers in this case expect the evidence to show. That'll get us up to speed as we jump into this trial that started today after multiple days of jury selection. You can imagine difficult to get a jury when there's such big names involved in the case. But as the trial was supposed to start today, it turns out the state said, well, once they heard what the defense was, and I'll tell you what I know about this case. I know that there's a gun involved, shooting involved, and that the defense says it was a prop gun or starter pistol, so not a real firearm, and that ASAP Rocky / Rihanna, their names were thrown around in this case. That's really all I knew until the day before the trial started, where the state offered ASAP Rocky 180 days in jail as a plea deal. And he said no, because he believes he's innocent. He believes he's going to win. The state was rumored to have said he made a big mistake and should have taken that deal. Well, the defense argues, or the state ends up bringing in now a ballistics expert, a firearm expert that's going to say the casings found, I believe, match either a magazine or firearm used by ASAP Rocky. It was kind of confusing and hard to hear because the audio wasn't the best in the beginning hearing. I'm going to do my best to boost it as much as I can. The defense says, no shot, no way we can do this, Judge. We need a continuance or this evidence needs to be suppressed. Don't let it in. It's way late disclosed. State said it's not late disclosed. As soon as we found out about it, we told you. Defense said we need to get our own expert. The judge was not too happy about it, but said, listen, defense, I'll give you a list of experts. I'll pay for it, meaning the state. The judge is like, we will pay for it. You to get an expert. I will push them to get it done now during trial. Basically, we're not going to continue the case. And if you don't like any of our experts that we have on a court-appointed list or a list of experts that have been certified in this expertise before, then you can pick your own. So it still remains to be seen about what's going to happen. Judge said absolutely no arguing about it or no discussing it in opening statements. For either side, the defense said, we don't like the jury anymore then, Judge. If we would have known this evidence was going to come in, we would have picked a different jury. Judge said, I don't believe you. You agreed with this jury. I think you like this jury. We're going forward. Major appellate issue before we even start. Fireworks before we even start. This judge has a kind of a handlebar mustache and he's taking no nonsense. High profile lawyers galore. But let's get into opening statements so we can actually figure out what this case is about.
That the events in this case were captured on surveillance video. I'm going to start this whole presentation out by playing the video for you. So you will have that frame of reference as we're talking about different features, the people that were involved, the locations that are involved, and what happened. You'll already have seen the video. The first video that I'm going to show you was captured on November 6th of 2021 at around 10:10 p.m., just outside of a parking garage entrance, mid-block, so on Argyle, in the middle of Argyle, between Hollywood Boulevard and Selma. The second video that I'm going to show you was captured 7 minutes later, so at 10:17. It was, if we're being generous, 2 blocks, maybe 1 city block away from the first location, down Argyle, around Selma, at a small intersection called Selma and Vista Del Mar. So I'm going to play the first video for you, that outside of the parking lot. Now I'm going to move to the second location, that at Vista Del Mar and Selma, and I'm going to pre-warn you, it's a little small, it's at a distance, so you're going to want to focus your attention at the top left-hand corner.
So he even talks about how it's not a perfect video. And that's obviously going to be part of it. Whenever we have surveillance video, it's a little grainy, a little far away. There's argument about what exactly happened or what some of the details are. But you'll see there are multiple people in the video. Sounds like they're going to testify as witnesses. So we're going to get a lot of this cleared up. Clearly hear what sounds like gunshots. We'll see. Can a starter pistol do that? Can it not? What's the audible difference between that and a real firearm? We'll see.
All right, now let's go over the details. As I said, the people that are involved, the location, and I'll give you an explanation of what you've seen on these two videos. This case takes place in the heart of Hollywood. This is the iconic Hollywood and Vine. The picture you see here is just a demonstrative picture of that intersection, but it's an iconic intersection in Hollywood. That intersection is about 1 block 1 block west and 1 block north of the crime scene. So for those of you who are familiar with Hollywood and that intersection, it's a pretty big landmark, and that's where I want to focus your attention. Now, the actual shooting in this case takes place on a much smaller street, Selma and Vista Del Mar. But this is the area around where that shooting took place. It is a very densely populated part of Hollywood, and there's some landmarks on there that you might be familiar with, just so that you can familiarize yourself with the location that we're talking about. The Capitol Records building at the top, the W Hotel, and Hollywood Boulevard. The shooting, as you've seen, occurred just outside of a parking lot on that corner of Vista, Del Mar, and Selma. That was a parking lot at the time that was full of cars. And it was ringed by a nightclub on the corner, a sound studio, a hotel, and 3 different apartment buildings right around. As I said, densely populated. This was also Saturday night. Saturday, November 6, 2021 at about 10 p.m. in Hollywood. This is a time that Hollywood is busy. Now that you understand kind of the locations that are involved, I want to start with how this case starts for LAPD.
Hi, I live in the apartment on the corner of Argyle and Selma in Hollywood. And there's just been a shooting.
So at 10:18 p.m., LAPD receives this call that there's been a shooting at the intersection of Argyle and Selma. The call continues though.
Did you see anything or you just heard it?
Yes. No, we watched it.
Okay, what did you see?
There were 4 men, and they were kind of fighting as they were walking along Argyle, and then they turned left onto Selma. We heard yelling, and they started running, and they turned left into the back lot apartments for El Centro Apartments.
Now, the 4 men that you see on that screen will be the 4 men that we'll talk about in a minute. They were the 4 that were at that location.
And then someone pulled out, the guy in the black sweatshirt pulled out a gun, and he shot, and I think the guy who shot was blue.
Now, the evidence in this case will be that the man in the black sweatshirt was the defendant, Rakeem Myers. That evidence will be uncontradicted. As you have heard throughout jury selection, Mr. Myers is an entertainer, and he goes by the stage name A$AP Rocky. You will hear other nicknames that he is referred to in the evidence in this case, including Flacco and Luigi. At the time of this crime, Mr. Myers was 33 years old. He has his own company that I believe is referred to as AWGE, A-W-G-E, that you will hear referred to in the testimony in this case. And as we talked about, his significant other is Rihanna. The victim in this case is a...
And they mentioned that they've talked about all this in jury selection already. So everybody knows he's connected to Rihanna, who he is, his stage name. So if that was going to be an issue, hopefully those people are off the jury.
Man by the name of Terrell Efron. And Mr. Efron, you will hear, was also a member of the A$AP Collective, and he went by the nickname A$AP Rocky. Mr. Efron was also 33 years old at the time of this crime. And what you will hear from Mr. Efron is that he was friends with Mr. Myers well before this case and well before even Mr. Myers was a famous individual. That essentially, I believe they met in high school and grew up together. He has known Mr. Myers 18 or 19 years at the time of this shooting happened. And you will also hear that he, too, at the time was working in the music industry, and he had his own company called Shut Eye Entertainment. Now, I mentioned it already, but to put a finer point on it, the group that both of these men were members of is called A$AP. It doesn't stand for what you probably thought it did when you walked into court. It's an acronym for Always Strive and Prosper. It was formed by high school age kids in Harlem, New York around 2006. They call themselves a collective. You will hear are rappers, producers, music video directors, designers, people that have different artistic pursuits that essentially work together. And there are many members.
I'm going to skip through this part where he kind of just introduces the different members, who they are. They're all connected in some different way, friends with different people at different times. And he discusses what they're all going to testify to as well.
As I said, the four main members of this group that you will hear about are these four men. The victim is on the far right, Mr. Efron. There was actually, at the time, a music festival or concert series going on known as Complex Con in Long Beach. And you will hear that Mr. Mayers was to be a performer at that event the day after the shooting, the Sunday, November 7th. Now, although I told you that Mr. Mayers and Mr. Efron were close at one point, you will hear that throughout their relationship, there was tension between the two of them. And that tension was essentially building up to the night of November 6th, 2021. You will not hear all the reasons why there was tension.
I think it's a good opening, by the way. It's telling the story, telling us what's happening, introducing us to everybody. It wasn't overly long or laborious, using pictures, using graphs, using videos, box marks, arrows to show us exactly what he wants us to see in the videos. I think it's a good opening. It definitely laid the land out for me for what I expect the prosecution to show and prove and what the story is and why this happened. Because again, coming into this, I really had no clue what the specific facts are of the case, what they're saying that ASAP Rocky did. I know there was a firearm involved, but this really laid it out for us.
Between the two of them, but we will get to the point the day before the shooting.
The guy in the white/tan cream colored suit is ASAP Rocky's main defense attorney.
November 5th, 2021, when that tension kind of comes to a head. What happens on that day, Mr. Efron will tell you, is that he is in a car with that last member of the ASAP group that I talked about, ASAP Bari. The two of them are driving when ASAP Bari receives a phone call from Mr. Mayers. And ASAP Bari takes that call on speakerphone. So Mr. Efron, who's in the car, can hear both sides of the conversation. He can hear Mr. Mayers and he can also hear ASAP Bari. And in the course of that call, Mr. Efron, the victim, heard the defendant saying these rude and aggressive things about him. Mr. Mayers at the time does not know that Mr.
Obviously, the victim is going to testify and he's going to say whatever he heard the defendant say about him that was rude, made him mad, started this altercation because tensions were brewing.
Mr. Efron is in the car with the victim. This leads to the next day, November 6th, 2021. You'll hear that Mr. Efron was in Los Angeles working with one of the artists that he managed. He was asleep around 9:00 p.m. when he started receiving a series of urgent messages from not only from Mr. Mayers, but from the two other men that were with him, ASAP Hills and ASAP.
And just so you can keep an ear out, Mr. Mayers is ASAP Rocky, the defendant. And Terrell Relly, I can't remember his last name now, is the victim.
12. And you'll hear that he received a number of calls kind of back to back to back from the three of them. Now, he didn't answer those calls because he was sleeping, but when he ultimately woke up, he saw that he had a number of missed calls. He also received text messages from Mr. Mayers that were aggressive, seeking a confrontation with him, asking him where he was. Mr. Mayers is on the left side of this conversation. Where are you at? Let's get to it. Stop ducking my calls. The messages that the victim is receiving are instantly aggressive towards him. So you will hear from Mr. Efron that he called the defendant. He was groggy because he had just woken up. They had a conversation and they agreed to meet outside of the W Hotel in Hollywood. Mr. Efron will tell you that as he went to that meeting, he was of the frame of mind that he and Mr. Mayers were going to have a confrontation. That he believed they would argue.
So old friends, tensions running high, thought there was going to be an altercation. Doesn't seem like, he thought it was going to be deadly. He's going to explain that. Maybe a fist fight, maybe a shouting match. I don't know. He knew it was going to be a confrontation, they say. And then obviously it escalates, allegedly.
And that ultimately this would lead to kind of repairing their relationship. So they would each be able to speak their piece and essentially fight like brothers do. And then it would ultimately bring them closer together. They would repair sort of the issues that they each had with each other. So that's how Mr. Efron is going into this meeting. Now, let's talk about the location where they meet. This location just outside of the W Hotel. You're going to see this map throughout this case. So I want to take some time to walk through it with you so you understand the various features that are depicted here. On the left side of the screen is Argyle Avenue. On the bottom of the screen is Selma Avenue. And on the right side of the screen is El Centro Avenue. Now, you can't see it in this map, but if the map were to continue off the top of the screen, Hollywood Boulevard would be just above that. In the middle of this map, there's a small street called Vista Del Mar, that kind of goes north and then forces you to go east. The red arrows that you see here are the path of travel that Mr. Mayers took that evening. So it starts at that mid-block location on Argyle, continues down to Selma.
And I love use of things like this. You know, you have the overview of the map, you use the arrows to show where they're walking, where the shooting took place, the numbers are where all the cameras are. He has the points plotted. I like it. I think it's, especially if you're a visual learner, you're getting a lay of the land of what the state is saying is happening, and what the state's doing subconsciously to the jurors is getting them to trust them, right? Saying things that they already know are true, like Argyle Avenue is here, and these are where the cameras are, and then we're going to see what the camera's showing. You're building trust. You're telling them the story. You're tying it all together, showing how it makes sense. It's a good opening statement from the state. They're not arguing, which is good as well.
And then up Vista Del Mar, around that corner, all the way to El Centro. Then he made a left turn on El Centro and went above, off the map. The numbers in the red boxes that you see here, 1, 2, 3, and 4, are the 4 different locations where the police were ultimately able to recover surveillance video from. There are 4 different locations. Attached to each one of those locations, you'll see the green triangle and the green, and with a green arrow in the middle. And what that represents is very roughly, this is not meant to be, exact, but very roughly the direction that a camera attached to that building was facing.
I'm going to skip ahead a little bit as he kind of talks about what each camera is. This one is the parking lot. And then eventually we get to the initial altercation is what the state shows us. And every time there's a security camera, I'll slow it down so we can make sure to watch it in real time. But this is an initial altercation. This is not where the shots were fired, but this is from a different camera angle to show here's the altercation. Again, they're trying to confirm that ASAP Rocky's the one in the black outfit, hoodie, and pants, that he had a firearm, that he pulled the trigger of the firearm, shot it. And it seems like there are going to be witnesses that maybe corroborate this, and everybody's going to kind of agree that he is the one in all black, he is the one with firearm, but that it's not a real firearm, that it's a starter pistol. So, some of the details are going to be agreed to, other ones are not.
And these cameras capture the initial encounter between the victim, Mr. Efron, who you see there, and the defendant, Mr. Mayers. And you can see that Ills is the first one to intervene to try to separate the two of them. And then at the very bottom of the screen, you see 12E putting his hand to try to also intervene and help separate them.
So this video, in my opinion, you can see their facial features a lot more. And so this is going to be the one they're going to help use to identify who's who, I think, which is why the defense couldn't just say it wasn't me, because of all the security footage. So they had to have a different defense, and we'll see if they can show that there's some truth to that, which again, we'll have to wait and see.
Now I know it goes by quickly, and you're not as familiar with all these people, so I want to kind of break it down a little bit for you and show you what the evidence that you're going to receive throughout this case. The first person that you see in that video is the victim, Mr. Efron. The second person who you see, who is instantly confrontational with Mr. Efron, is the defendant, Mr. Mayer.
Mr. Efron is the victim.
You see on the video that Mr. Mayers is immediately aggressive towards Mr. Efron. He's pulling at Mr. Efron's sweatshirt, and he's pushing Mr. Efron backward and pushes him off camera, out of camera view. The third person that you see, as I told you, is Elijah Ulanger, who also goes by ASAP Ills, or he might just be referred to as Ills throughout this. If you look closely, you can actually see his stage name embroidered on the jacket that he's wearing there. And what he attempts to do is to de-escalate the situation, to get between the two men and to physically separate them. And you'll see that all three of them go off screen for a period of time. Mr. Efron will tell you that during the period of time that they are off screen is when the defendant first produces that semi-automatic pistol from his waistband. He pulls it out of his waistband and he's holding it to Mr. Efron. Mr. Efron will tell you that the defendant pointed the gun at his chest and was essentially trying to point the gun around Ills, who was between them. That at the time that he was pointing the gun at Mr. Efron, he was also threatening Mr. Efron. I'm going to kill you. Keep in mind, these men have known each other for a long time. And Mr. Efron will tell you, in his state of mind, he never believed that he was going to be shot. He never believed that the defendant would actually shoot him. He will tell you that had this been a stranger, someone he didn't know as well, he would have been petrified. As you can imagine, anyone pointing a gun at you would upset you. But he knows the defendant. He knows that Mr. Mayers is not going to shoot him. He knows so much so that he'll tell you he looked at the defendant and said, if you brought a gun, you should shoot it. That's how confident he is that he knows the defendant is not going to pull that trigger. Now, the fourth.
Again, because they're boys, right? It's like, it's your buddy, you fight with him. If you've known him for long enough, you're almost like brothers. You're going to fight, but it's not going to escalate to that level. So he thought.
The person you can barely see on this video as they come back into frame, I told you, is Jamel Phillips, who goes by 12B or ASAP 12. You can just see his hand at the very bottom of the screen. When they come back on screen, and specifically when Mr. Mayers comes back on screen, you can see the gun in his hand. You will hear that that gun that he's holding is a semi-automatic pistol, or has features that are consistent with a semi-automatic pistol. Right now, as it's paused on the screen, you can see that he's holding that gun behind his back. But you will also see the gun come forward in front of his body before he ultimately tucks it back into his waistband. And you will see from the video that there were bystanders. As I said, this is a busy Saturday night in Hollywood, walking by as this confrontation is taking place. You will hear that right.
So we're going to jump ahead a little bit to when he starts to explain where everybody was. In the video, he uses the arrows again. I like when he does this. I think it's easy to kind of take in and understand. So we'll go ahead and watch him break down the video a little slower. They play the video multiple times, regular speed, slow-mo, arrows, explaining things to us, tags for which street is which to give you orientation, which I love because it can be very confusing sometimes, especially to a jury or to just the public watching and just not knowing really where they're at and catching their bearings. And I think that's really important, and they did a good job with that.
Video. It's not the most clear that you could possibly have, but it captures enough features that you can identify who is who when you watch this video. So I told you the main video that you're watching is from location number 2, and that smaller location number 3 is in the corner. Before I play the video, I want to orient you to what you're seeing. Along the top is Vista Del Mar. The parking lot is just out of view of the camera at the top of the screen. Along the top left-hand corner is Selma, forms that intersection. The red arrow is the defendant, Mr. Mayers. And the green arrow is the victim, Mr. Efron. Okay.
This is obviously later than the initial altercation. This is where the firearm was pulled. You hear the gunshots. This is where the alleged crime occurred that the state is trying to prove exactly what happened on this camera. Definitely not as clear as the other camera.
Now, what you see as the video plays is...
So what was interesting to me also about this part is he plays it multiple times. He zooms in, he slows it down. He talks about how he made the floodlights, go off. So we're going to be able to tell exactly, who was where. And again, this was good too. The little blurs, you show who's who. I thought they did a good job with that. One of the interesting factors in this case is the victim was not seriously injured. And they're going to admit that. And they're going to talk about that's why it's not maybe even charged as a more serious crime than what he's charged with at this point. I also think it's interesting just how they kind of handle, he says, you're going to hear what the elements are and what the crime is when the judge reads it to you. So that's an interesting way to not put it in your opening statement either. So let's listen to him discuss kind of how you deal with I'm not going to say it's a bad fact, but it's a more difficult fact to get the jury to really buy in and want to punish a defendant if the injury is not severe, number one. Number two, listen to how he describes or how he deals with maybe this injury didn't even come from a bullet. So let's take a listen.
As this is, holding ills in front of him. Now, despite how dangerous this is, having a semi-automatic pistol pointed at you and discharged twice, you will hear that Mr. Efron was not seriously injured by this shooting. He has these injuries to the middle knuckle of one of his hands. Mr. Efron will tell you that at the time.
So just to my untrained eye, that doesn't look like it was caused by a bullet. I guess it could have been, and we'll maybe hear from that. It definitely looks more like, I guess if you punch somebody, you wouldn't, I guess you could scrape these knuckles if you punch somebody, but more likely, like if you fell on the ground, we saw multiple people falling on the ground in the video. You scrape it on that. You could have scraped it on anything, really. And this wasn't the day of. We'll hear what happened the actual day of all of this and whether anybody reported it to law enforcement or called the cops. But it looks like that could have happened from a scrape from a lot of different areas, which doesn't mean he wasn't fired at, right? Let's hear the state explain it first, and then I'll kind of give what I think the defense is going to do. Because as I'm sitting here listening to you, I haven't heard the defense's opening. I'm actually recording this video in two parts. Maybe I'll play, one part Saturday morning, one part Sunday morning, but I don't know what the defense is going to argue yet. They're on break. They're taking a long lunch break, but let's hear how the state deals with it first. Then I'll give you kind of my guess as to what the defense is going to do with this.
Time the shooting was happening, he immediately felt a burning sensation to his hand, which led him to believe that these were graze wounds from one of the bullets that was shot at him. Perhaps they were. Perhaps they were not. Whether or not the victim in this case was actually shot or injured by this will not be something that you have to decide at the end of the case.
Maybe they are, maybe they're not. That's not something, whether or not he was shot is not something that you're going to have to decide in this case, is what he says. Like, isn't that interesting? So then if you go with the defense's argument that it's a starter pistol or prop gun, can't really fire live ammunition, we hear the pops, he showed it to him to scare him, but did he actually fire a firearm? If the bullets didn't hit anything, which is why you can figure out why Joe, I think you say it, Tacopina, the defense attorney, apparently big shot, California defense attorney. No surprise that A$AP Rocky would have somebody like that. I think he said something like, I've never been this mad in the courtroom before when you have this new expert report about those casings, which are obviously a big deal. And we'll figure out how exactly they were found at the scene of the crime, because it's about to get a lot more interesting. We're getting the story of what happened, but we're going to get down to the details of, now we see what the issues are. It's not quite cut and dry. This is one of them. The state's going to try to deal with them as best they can in the opening, but I have a feeling the defense is going to use all this to say, yeah, this wasn't a real firearm, which is why the new evidence that the state never disclosed to the defense before today, it sounds like, is a big problem.
We ask you to wait until the end of the case when the judge instructs you on the law, what elements are actually required to be proven before you make any decision. And to listen to the charges specifically and not consider charges that the defendant is not charged with. In this case, he's not charged with attempted murder, for instance. Now, before I move on, I want to focus in on the last.
I think it's kind of weird because you don't have to hit somebody for that, right? You don't have to hit somebody for it to be the attempted murder charge. And they didn't charge him with that, which to me is interesting. Why not? If you think he did this and you think he was firing a weapon at somebody to kill or seriously injure them, it's kind of, and the jury doesn't know this, but they offered him 180 days. It just gives me a little side eye because it seems like they've got a lot of evidence. It seems like they've got a really good case. Seems like the state has a very strong case so far. Again, I haven't heard the defense's opening statement yet, but this is what you're supposed to feel after the state's opening. You're supposed to feel like, good argument. I'm with you. I see the evidence moving that way, but I'm keeping an open mind. Let's hear what the defense has to say. Can you actually prove what you're saying? Because you're telling me what you think the evidence is going to show, but your opening statement is not evidence. The judge in this case even instructed the jury, if you're a note-taking kind of person, you can take notes, but you don't have to because this is not evidence. I don't love that instruction from the judge, and I would have asked him not to read it because I would say, Judge, I want them to take notes because I want them to hold the state accountable. Did the state actually prove everything they said they were going to prove in opening? Did we? Is it how we said it? Is it how they said it? Don't tell them not to take notes. That's what I would ask. The judge can do what a judge is going to do. But the judge told them they don't have to take notes because it's not evidence.
Last location that I haven't talked about much is location number 4. That location is a loading dock for this building on El Centro. It's right in the corner of El Centro and Vista Del Mar. And what you'll see in the video from that location is the defendant, Mr. Mayers, and his companion, Dwelby, walking from Vista Del Mar up El Centro towards Hollywood Boulevard. The arrows indicate their path of travel. They're going to come from that corner and then walk up El Centro. The camera itself is in that red circle. And you'll see this video is far more clear. And you'll see features of their clothing that you can match up to the clothing from the other videos that we've already watched. For instance, I mean, you can see just from Mr. Mayer's facial features, he's the one wearing all black. You can see from his facial features compared to the video from the parking structure. And then, as I said, the various features of his clothing, the rhinestones on the hood of his sweatshirt in both videos, and the design, the rhinestone design on the chest of his sweatshirt at both videos. And taking all the videos in their totality and comparing them is how you'll be able to decide on the video who is who. Now, I played the 911 call for you that LAPD received at 10:18, which triggered their response. And you'll see in here that at 10:27, LAPD officers responded to the 911 call. And as is their duty, they responded quickly to this call to try to of shots fired in the middle of Hollywood. You will hear from at least one of the officers who responded to that location. And the officer will tell you that as part of their uniform, they wear cameras that are mounted to their chest. And you will actually get to watch camera that captures the police response. After the shooting, the evidence will be that all 4 of these men, the defendant, Dwelby, Ills, and the victim, all left the scene.
Well, that's a problem, right? Everybody left the scene, including the victim. Didn't call the cops immediately, didn't report it, didn't tell them exactly where it happened, and that's a major issue in the case. And you're going to find out why.
You'll hear that there were at least 2 people who called 911 to report this crime who were just people living in the surrounding area, not actually involved in the altercation itself. You'll hear that the 911 callers were reporting different information. So the first call would be that the gunshots were fired at Argyle and Selma. The second call would be that the gunshots were fired in the area closer to Vista Del Mar and El Centro. You will hear from the officer that as they responded, they come to the scene looking for a victim. That's their primary focus, trying to find anyone who needs immediate life-saving attention. Their second focus will be looking for the potential suspects if they can find them.
So he's dealing with a bad fact. Okay. And this is how lawyers do it. You try not to let the jury know it's a bad fact that you're dealing with, but he's clearly dealing with a bad fact. So what does he say? He said the people that called 911, they weren't involved. So they don't know the specific location of what happened. They give police officers conflicting locations. So the cops don't know the exact location. And then what does he say about what the cops do? They came and they did their best. Their number one thought was life-saving measures. Do they need to help somebody save their life? They heard shots fired. Secondarily, they're trying to find who did it and if they can find any evidence.
And you'll hear from the officer that as he's receiving information that's taking him to different locations, he's actually going between the different locations and trying to piece together what happened. But what will be important from his testimony is that he is not given a precise location to exactly where this shooting happened. And with the limited information that he has, he and his partner are doing the best job that they can to find any victims, any suspects, or any evidence of a shooting. You'll hear the officer talk to different people who were just out and about, try to figure out what was going on, that neither of the 911 callers would meet with them, and that they searched not only the surrounding streets, but they primarily focused on the parking lot that was right at that corner of Vista Del Mar and Selma, because the second 911 caller had told him, or had relayed that it was possible that the shooting was happening into a car. The officer will tell you that they searched the area and they did not find any evidence of a shooting. They didn't find a victim with injuries. They didn't find any of the suspects, and they didn't find any discharged cartridge cases. They'll tell you that they searched the area.
So we're going to listen to that one more time. They did the best they could with the information they had, but all I hear him saying is they didn't find this, they didn't find that. Nothing was actually found by law enforcement the day of the crime, of the alleged crime. That's usually a big problem for the state.
The shooting was happening into a car. The officer will tell you that they searched the area and they did not find any evidence of a shooting. They didn't find a victim with injuries. They didn't find any of the suspects, and they didn't find any discharged cartridge cases, which are what come out of a gun after you discharge it in the surrounding area.
They didn't even find any of the cartridges, right? The bullet, whatever you want to call them, right? I know the casings, the official words for them, but basically the thing that comes out of the gun after you shoot it that proves you shot a gun and a bullet came out, right? They didn't find any of that anywhere. Any of the locations people said it happened, they thought maybe even the shots were fired into a car. And they didn't have a victim reporting a crime that night. And he doesn't report it until later, until after doing some other things that may be an issue for his credibility.
But again, they don't know exactly where to look with limited information that they're getting. You will also hear from Mr. Efron that approximately...
Defense is clearly going to say they didn't find it because it didn't happen. There was no bullet that fired out of the gun.
An hour, and he's not precise on the exact time, but approximately an hour after the shooting, he himself returned to the location. Now, at this time, the police have already responded and left.
So I paused it there in a not a good time, but he says the victim, about an hour later, he's not exactly sure precisely what time, but about an hour later, he shows back up to the crime scene and he finds casings because he knows where it is. And it's approximately an hour after, but police have cleared out. Everybody's gone. Nobody's there anymore.
Efron will tell you that he and his girlfriend went there specifically to look for evidence that this had happened. Evidence of the shooting.
He and his girlfriend went specifically to look for evidence of the shooting. Could very well be true, right? And I get it. If I got shot at, I'd probably, I would call the cops. Let's be honest. I would call the cops. Cops would come, do their job, do the investigation, find what they can find, and start proving the case, right? He didn't do that. It's his friend. I don't know what he was thinking. Maybe he had something else on the mind, which we'll find out in a second. But he and his girlfriend, who I assume is also going to testify that they went there an hour after. Obviously, there's going to be some credibility issues. Maybe she's biased because she's his girlfriend. Maybe she wants to help him out. I don't know. We'll see. If the defense decides to go there, my guess is yes. But he, not the cops, he, the victim, finds the casings.
And Mr. Efron will tell you, because he knew exactly where the shooting happened, that he was able to locate 2 fired cartridges. And this is actually a photograph that Mr. Efron himself took of one of the fired cartridge cases that he found.
So he's taking a picture. He's documenting. Again, doesn't call the cops to do this. He documents it himself, takes a picture. Now, finding 2 cartridges is also important because we heard 2 shots on the video. So that corroborates. That's objective evidence that matches up with the victim's story. That's good.
Mr. Efron, you'll hear, went to the police 2 days later, walked into the Hollywood police station to report this crime happening. He brought the...
Did you catch that? So he did go to the cops 2 days later. If you're going back to the scene to find evidence that the shooting happened, why not call them then? Why not go into the police station then? When they can go back out to the scene, maybe they can find where the bullet did hit, right? Was it lodged in the wall or something? Why did he wait 2 days to go to the police station? Now, it could be a very easy explanation. He was trying to work it out with his friend. He didn't want to get his friend in trouble. He thought everything was going to be cool and they were going to be boys again. And that could very well be true. Maybe he was scared. His friend is rich and powerful and famous and he didn't know what to do. And then he eventually got up the gumption to go to the police. That could very well be true too. But that is going to be a question that the defense asks and is probably going to point out to the jury as a problem in the state's case.
The 2 fired cartridge cases with him and he gave them to the police. You will hear that the 2 cartridge cases that he brought in were 9mm Luger caliber cartridge cases. However, you will also hear from Mr. Efron that immediately after the shooting, about an hour and a half later, he started text messaging the defendant. And he text messaged the defendant.
So again, if we're sticking, this is where the state gets a little wild on their timeline. Not that it gets bad, but just I think he should have said He went and searched the scene about an hour later, find the shell casings. Then about 30 minutes after that, he starts talking to the defendant, as opposed to just saying right now, an hour and a half after the shooting, because now I'm trying to figure out, was he still on scene? Was this when he was taking pictures? Is this when he had the casings? Did he send the defendant the picture of the casings? That got a little bit confusing, but we'll hear them discuss what happened and what the defendant says in response.
You tried killing me. That was the first message he sent to him. And you'll hear that Mr. Mayer's response was to deny that anything happened. The defendant, in abbreviation, says, "What the fuck is he talking about? Why are you telling people I shot at you?" Denying that any shooting has even happened.
And waited 36 minutes to respond, which is interesting. But yeah, deny.
Mr. Efron confronts him again. "You set me up to try to take me from my daughter." And the defendant responds, "I tried to do what? I know you hate me, I hate you too." The defendant responds again, "Stop making shit up." Again, denying any confrontation took place. Certainly any shooting.
And that is a good and bad thing, right? Well, deny, you say it didn't happen. Well, I think it sounds like, based on what some of the witness testimony is expected to be, that he is going to admit that there was an altercation. He is going to admit he pulled out something that looked like a real firearm and maybe even went pop, pop, even though it does not fire real bullets. So he's denying it here, but he was lying. Why was he? So maybe it's not going to have the positive effect of, hey, he denied it. It wasn't him. He didn't do it. He's denied it from day one. Maybe you lose a little bit of that effect if now you're admitting that an altercation did happen with something that looked like a firearm.
We've already told you in jury selection, and you will hear evidence, that after this shooting...
Here we go. So now here's an alternative theory about why the victim waited. And you know the defense is going to say, this is the whole reason we're here today, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. It's all about money. My client has it, and the victim wants it.
Mr. Efron sought money from Mr. Mayers. In fact, hours after the shooting, this is the next day, November 7th, in the early morning hours, 3:40 a.m., you'll hear that Mr. Efron sent a message to one of his friends saying that he wants money. And identifying the reason why he wants that money is because Mr. Mayers shot at him. You will also hear that based upon these two incidents, the parking lot and the shooting on the corner, that Mr. Efron filed a civil lawsuit against Mr. Mayers. At the end of this case,
he asked him for money, and he filed a civil lawsuit against the defendant. So the victim clearly was trying to use this to get money. Maybe that's why he didn't call the cops right away. Maybe he's like, hey, you shot at me, give me some money. Then he calls the cops, put more pressure on him. Now it's a criminal case, give me your money. Now he's suing him civilly at the same time the criminal case is going on. And guess what? If you win this criminal case and you're a criminal victim, it makes it a lot easier to go win in civil court as well. Now, what are the damages? Assault, put him in fear, not really serious bodily injury, because it didn't, even the state admits he did not get seriously injured, but still absolutely a civil case if you can prove it. And the criminal courts, higher burden, beyond a reasonable doubt. If you prove it there and win, a lot easier. Like I said, sometimes it's even res judicata, meaning it's already been decided that the defendant did do this to you, and now we just figure out what the money amount is.
Will not be asked to award Mr. Efron any money. So that
tells him, hey, this jury here, you're the criminal jury. You don't have to worry about it. You're not going to be asked to give him any money. That's not what this is about. This is the state dealing with bad facts. And I think they did okay with it. It wasn't the best. It wasn't a home run. It wasn't horrible, but I think they put it at the right spot, right? Kind of later in the case to explain things away. But after they've already built some credibility, explained how it happened, showed the security cam footage to kind of get the jury to have a frame of reference of what actually happened.
Consideration will not be a part of your what you're asked to determine. Moving forward in time, you'll hear from LAPD detectives that Mr. Mayer's home was searched on April 20th of 2022, and that during that search, LAPD detective recovered a magazine for a semi-automatic pistol that was 9mm caliber, and that it was loaded with 6 unfired 9mm Luger rounds of live ammunition. You will hear that these items were found in Mr. Mayer's bedroom closet. You will also hear that there was no handgun that was 9mm in Mr. Mayer's home that was for that magazine. So you have a 9mm magazine, but no handgun to go with it. The last.
So they never found the firearm, and they're saying, well, there's a 9mm magazine, but no firearm, because, to read between the lines, the state's saying he got rid of the firearm, but proof he had a firearm at some point because there's the magazine. That ain't no starter pistol. This is for a real firearm. And this, their expert is going to say, is my guess, matches up with the casings that they found, at least size-wise.
The point I want to leave you with before I conclude is that we expect, in this case, that the defense will call Swelby, Mr. Phillips, to testify. At the time of the shooting, again, he's friends with all these participants. He's 32 years old. And it is expected that he will testify that the defendant was, in fact, the person on the video who fired the 2 gunshots that we hear. So it will essentially be uncontested that Mr. Mayers was the person who fired the gun at that street corner.
So it's essentially uncontested. All the witnesses are going to agree that he did fire what looks like a firearm. Even his friends, even the people that may testify on behalf of the defendant.
And that he will tell you the gun that the defendant fired was a starter pistol. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what the evidence in this case will show at the end of this case. As I've said, we expect that the defense will attempt to present an alternative explanation for what happened that night. But we ask you to do one thing, which is, as you evaluate the evidence from both sides in this case, to not leave your common sense at the door. And wait until the end of the case, when you have all the evidence, to make your decision, listen to the court's instructions on the law, and return the only just verdict there is. Thank you.
So that's the end of the state's opening. Very interesting. I think they did a good job, again, laying the land for a case I didn't know a ton about. What did you guys think? What grade would you give that? By the way, if you're interested in this trial, hit the like button. Make sure you let me know in the comments, and we'll continue to follow it. If you're not, we don't have to follow it. It gets really interesting with what facts are agreed to and what facts aren't. We're going to get some interesting testimony about whether a bullet was ever fired. Was it a starter pistol? Some expert testimony potentially on the ballistics. That'll be interesting. A lot about, was this all done for money? How did those injuries to his hand really happen? A lot of really interesting questions just by listening to the state's opening. So that might be the end of the video. I don't really know. I'm going to go watch the defense's opening, and that'll either be part 2 to this video and we'll splice them together, or it'll be coming out tomorrow morning. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you're subscribed as well. If you're following this trial, make sure you're subscribed to our channel, because we're going to continue to do recaps of it throughout the time of the trial. I don't know if it'll be daily or every couple days, but it's really interesting to me so far, especially with some of the fireworks to start the trial. So I appreciate you guys being here. Until next time, which could be very soon, I'm out of here. Thanks for watching another episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit the thumbs up and share with your friends who may be interested here on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. And don't forget to check out the Lawyer You Know podcast, with new seasons dropping every quarter. If you have a case you want to talk to us about, if it's a personal injury case, wrongful death, catastrophic injury, car accident, or slip and fall case, please email us at lawyeryouknow@gmail.com. And of course, all these links I just mentioned are included in the description below on this episode and every episode. So until next time, this is Peter Tragos, The Lawyer You Know.